So what if the biggest conflicts of our time, what if they aren't really about politics or economics? What if they're about something much, much deeper, something cultural? That's the powerful and, let's be honest, kind of dangerous idea at the heart of Samuel P. Huntington's The Clash of Civilizations. It's a theory that completely changed how we looked at the world after the Cold War ended.
Okay, so I want you to imagine it's the early 1990s. The Berlin Wall is rubble, the Soviet Union, gone. For like half a century, the entire world was basically defined by this one single fight, capitalism versus communism. And then, boom, it was over. The question on everyone's mind wasn't just, what happens now? It was more like, okay, who are we supposed to fight now?
And look, this wasn't some stuffy academic debate. No, this was a global puzzle. The old rules were just gone. It created this massive power vacuum, and you had thinkers all over the world literally scrambling to figure out what the new map of power was even going to look like.
So, out of all that uncertainty, two really big and completely opposite ideas about the future popped up. On one side, you had the ultimate optimist, a guy named Francis Fukuyama. He famously declared it was the end of history. And on the other side, well, you had the ultimate pessimist, Samuel Huntington, who came in with this stark warning of a clash of civilizations. Now, Fukuyama's idea, it was a huge hit. He was basically saying, all right, folks, the big fights are over. The great ideological battles finished. Western liberal democracy didn't just win the Cold War, he argued. It won history itself. This was it, the final form of human government, and its values were just going to spread all over the globe. But Samuel Huntington had a completely different take, a much darker one. He looked at all that optimism and said, no, this isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. He was convinced the future wasn't going to be this peaceful global handshake. Instead, it was going to be a return to a much older, much more fundamental kind of conflict.
Okay, so here's the absolute core of his argument. Huntington believed the Cold War was like a historical anomaly, an exception. He said that for most of human history, we didn't fight over things like capitalism or communism. No, we fought over our identity, our religion, our heritage, our deepest values. He argued that the world was just snapping back to normal. The next big conflicts weren't going to be ideological. They were going to be cultural.
So if the world isn't divided by ideology anymore, what is it divided by? Well, Huntington had an answer for that. He said it was broken up into a handful of huge cultural blocks that he called civilizations.
So what's a civilization in his book? Well, think of it as the ultimate us. It's the biggest cultural team you can possibly belong to. It's way broader than just your country. It's about the shared language, the shared history, and, this is super important, the shared religion that ties these enormous groups of people together.
And this right here, this is basically his map of that new world. He pointed to about 7 or 8 of these major civilizational groups. You've got the Western civilization, right? And then the Cynic, which is basically China and its sphere of influence. You have the Islamic world, the Orthodox world with Russia at its center, and a few others. And his big point was that these were the new power players that were going to define everything in global politics.
And this all led to his most famous prediction. He said future wars wouldn't be fought across some political line, like the Iron Curtain. Nope, they'd be fought along the cultural fault lines. You know, the places where these massive civilizations actually meet and grind up against each other. We're talking about places like the Balkans, the Caucasus, or the Middle East.
So, as you can probably imagine, this theory was absolutely explosive. Let's just say it did not get a warm welcome in academic circles. It drew immediate, intense criticism from all over. The critics weren't just saying he was wrong, they were saying his vision of the world was deeply, deeply problematic.
Yeah, the pushback was fierce. I mean, Huntington was making these really provocative claims, like his infamous line, "Islam's borders are bloody." But critics like Fuad Ajami immediately fired back saying, hold on a second, civilizations don't control states. State interests do. You know, power and money. And the legendary scholar Edward Said, he just dismissed the whole thing as a clash of ignorance, a catchy phrase that just reinforced lazy stereotypes.
So the main criticisms really boil down to 4 big points. First, people said it's just way too simplistic. I mean, come on, the Islamic world isn't one single thing. Sunni and Shia Muslims have been in conflict for centuries. Second, it totally ignores how states actually work. Countries often act based on pure self-interest, economics, power, not some fuzzy cultural feeling. Third, and this one is huge, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell leaders the world is us versus them, they might start acting that way.
And finally, a lot of people called it out as being essentialist, even racist, arguing that it painted non-Western cultures, especially Islam, with this really dangerous, broad, and negative brush.
Okay, so for years, the theory was just this hot topic debated back and forth in universities. But then, an event happened. An event that yanked this theory right out of the library and threw it onto the table in the White House Situation Room. And it changed everything about how people saw Huntington's work.
Just take a look at this timeline. So the theory is kind of bubbling along in the 90s, and a lot of people think it's just being alarmist. Then, September 11th, 2001, and in a single morning, everything changes. All of a sudden, you have this conflict that looks exactly what he described, a radical Islamist group attacking the West. And Huntington's clash suddenly seemed terrifyingly, horribly real.
Almost overnight, Huntington went from being this controversial academic to, well, to a prophet in some people's eyes. His book became required reading for anyone trying to understand the new War on Terror. Why? Because for a lot of people, it gave them a simple, powerful, and frankly, ready-made explanation for something that felt totally incomprehensible. It gave them a framework. This wasn't just a terrorist attack, the thinking went. This was a civilizational conflict.
So where does that leave us today? What's the real legacy of this incredibly powerful and incredibly troubled idea? While its influence is just undeniable, it's still shaping how tons of people, especially here in the West, see the world and global politics.
The theory's influence has been massive, and yeah, deeply controversial. It pretty much became a foundational text for the neoconservative worldview that kicked off the War on Terror. But here's the crazy part. Huntington himself was actually against the Iraq War. Go figure. The idea continues to pop up and influence right-wing movements today, while its critics are just as loud, arguing it's just a new version of Orientalism. You know, that old Western habit of seeing the East as exotic, dangerous, and just fundamentally other.
And all of this really leaves us with that one big question, right? Was Samuel Huntington a prophet who actually saw the true nature of our world, or did he just hand the world a really powerful hammer, and now everything and everyone looks like a nail? The power of this theory isn't just about whether it's right or wrong, it's about how it continues to shape the very world we see around us. And that debate, it isn't just about the past, it's about the future that all of us are building right now.